Hollywood has always sold the dream of perfection, flawless faces, sculpted bodies, and stars who seemed untouchable. But behind the curtain, not every actor fit that polished image. Some carried visible differences, chronic illnesses, or hidden injuries that studios tried to downplay, conceal, or even exploit. These weren't just quirks, they shaped entire careers, created cult followings, and sometimes destroyed lives. The question is, were these actors truly celebrated, or did Hollywood simply use their struggles as entertainment? Rondo Hatton, the tragedy in the grotesque. Rondo Hatton's life reads almost like a horror script. He wasn't always the monster man that horror fans remember. In fact, in the early 1930s, he was a Florida sports writer with a promising career, known more for his quick pen than his appearance. But then came acromegaly, a rare hormonal disorder caused by a pituitary tumor. His jaw widened, his brow protruded, and his hands grew massive. Doctors couldn't stop the changes, and soon Hatton's face bore the hallmarks of his condition. Most people would have stepped away from the spotlight. Hollywood, however, saw opportunity. Universal Studios didn't just cast him, they built characters entirely around his look. Films like House of Horrors and The Brute Man didn't bother to disguise his condition. They advertised it. Audiences were drawn in by the grotesque, while critics debated whether the films crossed the line into exploitation. Film historian Tom Weaver once described Hatton's performances as quietly tragic. Unlike the soulless monsters he played, there was humanity in his eyes. Yet, off-screen, whispers of mistreatment spread. Insiders claimed Universal gave him little more than a paycheck, leaving him to endure the gawking crowds alone. Despite this, Hatton built a loyal horror fan base. They weren't celebrating his condition. They admired the unsettling calm he brought to the screen. His life was short. On February 2, 1946, he died of a heart attack at just 51, likely linked to his acromegaly. But his name still echoes through the genre. Today, the Rondo Hatton Classic Horror Awards honor his legacy, reminding fans that the man who didn't fit Hollywood's mold carved out an unforgettable place in it. But Hatton was far from alone. Another actor would prove that even standing under 4 feet tall couldn't stop a determined performer from shaking up Hollywood. Michael Dunn, the outsider who stole the spotlight. Michael Dunn was born in 1934 with spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia, a skeletal disorder that stunted his growth and altered his spine. Standing at just 3 feet 10 inches, he grew up in an industry obsessed with height, symmetry, and glamour. Most would have written him off immediately. But Dunn had other plans. By the mid-1960s, he was stealing scenes. His role as Glocken in Stanley Kramer's Ship of Fools earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, a staggering accomplishment at a time when Hollywood rarely acknowledged actors with visible disabilities. Dunn's nomination wasn't just recognition, it cracked Hollywood's polished facade. But his most famous role came on television. From 1965 to 1968, Dunn played Dr. Miguelito Loveless on The Wild Wild West. He wasn't just another villain of the week, he was brilliant, theatrical, and genuinely menacing. TV historian David Bianculli has called Loveless one of the smartest villains ever seen on network television. Audiences agreed, and Dunn became a cult icon. Yet the industry still typecast him, often offering roles steeped in outdated stereotypes. Dunn wasn't quiet about it. He famously declared, "I am a human being first, an actor second, and a dwarf third." His words were a direct rebuke to Hollywood's hierarchy, but his relentless pace came with a cost. The travel, long shooting hours, and the physical toll of performing eventually wore him down. On August 30, 1973, at just 38 years old, Dunn was found dead in London. The cause? Respiratory failure, though his underlying condition almost certainly played a role. Dunn's life was short, But his work proved size didn't dictate brilliance. And if his difference challenged Hollywood's idea of normal, another actor's unforgettable eyes made comedy history in ways nobody saw coming. Marty Feldman, the comic rebel. Marty Feldman's bulging, misaligned eyes became his trademark. But they weren't the result of a gag. Feldman developed Graves' disease, an autoimmune disorder that attacks the thyroid and can cause exophthalmos, or protruding eyes. For most aspiring actors, it would have been career-ending. For Feldman, it was a weapon. He leaned into it. When Mel Brooks cast him as Igor, or rather, Igor, in Young Frankenstein, 1974, Feldman delivered one of the most memorable performances in comedy history. His shifting hump, exaggerated expressions, and those unforgettable eyes weren't just funny, they were iconic. Critics praised his timing, but fans loved how he turned a medical condition into comic genius. Viewers coined the phrase, "He made weird beautiful." Feldman's career became a satire of Hollywood itself, mocking the obsession with perfection by exaggerating the very thing that made him different. Behind the scenes, though, Feldman was vocal about the industry's shallow ideals. He picked roles that pushed back against beauty standards, challenging audiences to laugh with him, not at him. In doing so, he opened the door for others with visible differences to be seen as more than just punchlines. Tragically, Feldman's life ended abruptly. On December 2, 1982, while filming in Mexico City, he suffered a fatal heart attack. Rumors still swirl, some blame years of chain smoking, others the stress of non-stop work. Whatever the cause, he was only 48. Feldman's death left fans mourning, but his career had already flipped Hollywood's script. And like him, some stars turned their conditions into trademarks that redefined entire roles. Peter Falk, one eye, infinite charm. Most people didn't realize that Peter Falk, the man who became a household name as Lieutenant Columbo, had only one eye. At age 3, he lost his right eye to retinoblastoma, a rare childhood cancer. The replacement glass eye left him with a permanent squint. In an industry where casting directors chased symmetrical perfection, Falk seemed an odd choice, but he didn't hide it. He embraced it. When he debuted as Columbo in 1968, his tilted head, wandering gaze, and deliberate pacing all became part of the detective's mystique. What others saw as limitation, Falk transformed into character depth. Industry insiders speculate that his lack of depth perception shaped Columbo's style. The pauses, the careful movements, the way he leaned in as if trying to see through suspects. Falk himself had a sense of humor about it, once joking, "I've got one eye, but I can see through you." Directors adapted their blocking to accommodate him, but audiences never noticed. His commanding presence filled the screen. Over the years, fans debated who could possibly replace him in a reboot. So far, nobody has. But while Falk turned a physical difference into a career-defining strength, others had to fight through illness and impairment just to stay on screen. Howard McNear, the barber who wouldn't quit. Howard McNear was beloved as Floyd the Barber on The Andy Griffith Show. But in 1963, tragedy struck. He suffered a major stroke that left the left side of his body impaired. Normally, that would have been the end of an actor's career, but Andy Griffith wasn't ready to let him go. Scripts were rewritten, staging was adjusted, and props were used to hide his limitations. McNear often appeared seated or leaning against counters, his movement restricted but his comedic timing still razor-sharp. While the show didn't openly acknowledge his condition, it didn't erase him either. His slower speech and subtle physical differences became part of the performance, making Floyd feel more authentic than ever. Behind the scenes, it was Andy Griffith himself who pushed to keep McNear on the show. Filming schedules were reportedly rearranged just to make it possible. It was rare loyalty in an era when disability usually meant instant replacement. By 1967, McNear's health forced him into retirement. But his time back on screen left an important mark. He showed that visible disability didn't have to be hidden. It could exist naturally within mainstream television. For other stars, though, illness wasn't visible until they made the brave decision to go public. And in doing so, they changed Hollywood's conversation about disease forever. Annette Funicello, the musketeer who refused pity. Annette Funicello was one of Disney's original musketeers, later starring in a string of 1960s beach films that cemented her as America's sweetheart. But in 1987, everything changed when she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a degenerative neurological disorder that robs the body of muscle control. For 5 years, Funicello kept it secret. In Hollywood, illness was still seen as a career killer. When she finally revealed the truth in 1992, she explained, "I didn't go public because I didn't want pity." Her courage transformed her image. She appeared publicly in a wheelchair, not as a figure of tragedy, but as an advocate. She founded the Annette Funicello Research Fund for Neurological Diseases, raising money and awareness. Her openness inspired others in the industry to speak about their own health battles. She passed away in April 2013, but her impact remains. By refusing pity, Funicello forced Hollywood and audiences to confront chronic illness with dignity. If her struggle was fought against disease, other actors carried scars from battlefields, hiding wounds that never healed. James Arness, the war hero behind Gunsmoke. James Arness, towering at 6 feet 7 inches, was the face of Gunsmoke for 2 decades. What audiences didn't know was that he carried a permanent war wound. In 1944, while serving with the U.S. Army during the brutal Anzio campaign in Italy, Arness was hit by machine gun fire in the leg. The injury nearly cost him his limb. Instead, it left him with a lifelong limp and chronic pain. When he became Marshal Dillon, producers carefully concealed it. Low camera angles, blocking tricks, and selective edits minimized the limp. Arness himself rarely spoke of it. He once said, "I felt the character had to stand on his own." But those who knew him said the stoicism he projected on screen came directly from his injury. Each day of filming took a toll, yet he endured. For fellow veterans, his quiet grit made him a symbol of resilience. If Arness bore the wounds of war, another actor carried the slow, relentless pain of disease, yet never stopped working. John Carradine, acting through pain. John Carradine's career spanned over 350 films. His gaunt features and booming voice made him a horror staple. But behind the screen, severe arthritis was destroying his body. By the late 1960s, the disease twisted his hands and stiffened his movements. Directors sometimes leaned into it, letting his rigid posture and halting gait enhance his eerie presence. Whether intentional or not, Carradine's illness became part of his image, but his work ethic was unstoppable. He pushed through discomfort, often needing help between takes. His children, actors David, Keith, and Robert Carradine, later revealed how much pain he endured in silence. For Carradine, acting wasn't just a job. It was his lifeline. He refused to slow down, believing performance was the only true relief. In doing so, he built a legacy not of fragility, but of sheer resilience. While Carradine worked through pain, another Hollywood legend endured a hidden spinal injury for over 50 years and used it to fuel change. Ricardo Montalban, pain behind perfection. Ricardo Montalban's career was marked by charisma. From the enigmatic Mr. Rourke on Fantasy Island to the unforgettable Khan in Star Trek II. Few knew he lived most of his life in constant pain. In 1951, while filming Across the Wide Missouri, a horse fell on him, crushing his spine. The injury left him with partial paralysis and chronic pain that never truly healed. He underwent surgeries, managed his condition quietly, and often performed through agony. Speculation swirled during Star Trek II that his muscular physique was a body double. Montalban laughed it off, insisting it was all him, even if every move hurt. Later in life, he turned his struggle into advocacy. He founded the Ricardo Montalban Foundation to support underrepresented and disabled performers. The historic Doolittle Theater in Los Angeles was renamed the Montalban Theater, dedicated to inclusive arts. When he passed in 2009 at 88, his legacy wasn't just talent. It was advocacy, resilience, and a refusal to let injury define him. But not all stories ended in triumph. Some ended in heartbreak, like the actor whose on-set accident cut his career short and reshaped TV history. Dick York, bewitched and broken. Dick York, best known as Darren Stevens on Bewitched, had his life altered in a single moment. In 1959, while filming They Came to Cordura, he suffered a severe spinal injury lifting a heavy prop. Muscles tore, vertebrae shifted, and his back was never the same. By the time Bewitched premiered in 1964, York was already in constant pain. He filmed 5 seasons while barely holding himself together. Scenes were rewritten so he could lean, sit, or be supported. Behind the camera, he relied on painkillers just to function. In 1969, his body gave out. He collapsed on set, hospitalized, and never returned to the show. Producers replaced him with Dick Sargent, sparking one of the most controversial casting swaps in TV history. For years, fans didn't know the truth. Later, York spoke openly about his pain, his struggles with dependency, and his determination to help others. He founded Acting for Life, a nonprofit supporting people in need, including the homeless. His final act wasn't on screen but in advocacy, turning personal suffering into compassion for others. Hollywood's golden age promised polish, but behind the camera, scars, illnesses, and hidden struggles told a different story. Rondo Hatton, Michael Dunn, Marty Feldman, Peter Falk, Howard McNear, Annette Funicello, James Arness, John Carradine, Ricardo Montalban, and Dick York each proved that difference didn't diminish talent. Some were exploited, others celebrated, but all forced Hollywood to confront the reality it tried to hide. Perfection is an illusion. Maybe it's not the flawless faces we remember most. Maybe it's the quirks, the scars, the resilience, the things that made these stars human. So the question remains, if Hollywood once hid imperfection, what stories are still being hidden today?